Oops, that's not sharing in the way I want to do it. Present. Man, it's I almost said it's Wednesday. It's Thursday. So this is us. Jake, do you want to try to?
Yeah, I moved closer to my router now, so hopefully that will solve the problem. So I'm Jake. I run training enablement at Penrod. I'm one of the co-leads here. Gabe's the other one. And you can hit me up on Twitter at sforcedarkknight.
Great. And my name is Gabriel Rholl. I am a technical architect at Penrod, and my Twitter handle is at Gabriel Rholl. Okay, so Jake, do you want to go through this?
Yep, over this. So just one thing to note, open prioritization of any of the Salesforce ideas is open till the end of February. I was going to try to show it off today, but their site does not allow you to do anything right now, so hopefully next time. So you can always go there if it's for the your top ideas. You can prioritize which ones you want Salesforce to kind of focus on.
Cool. Slide. Guess we don't have any announcements.
I don't have any announcements, but I figured I'd throw it out there. If anyone has anything they want to throw out there in chat, go ahead and we'll say kudos to that. And then we'll move on to the next slide.
I'm waiting to monitoring the chat.
I mean, I'll give your shout out, Gabe, that you get your JavaScript 1 cert.
Thank you. Yeah, that one's tough. Just so everyone knows, don't walk into it blind. I needed every ounce of my studying to pass that. I think I passed it by like one question, and then the super badge is no joke either.
I think that might be a good, not just JavaScript Dev 1, but just in general, some of the certifications out there might be a good topic for us in the future too.
Yeah, well, JavaScript development in general is great. Yeah, we should take that note. It's definitely some cool stuff, and actually, I'll be showing some JavaScript today, obviously, with the Lightning component interfacing with flows, and so you'll get to see a little bit of JavaScript today, which is cool.
Very cool.
We use Bevy demo. How about don't
we try that already, and we're not going to do that because that seems to break everything.
Yeah. It's definitely a much better experience to be able to hear and see everyone. So just for that alone, I'm definitely a fan of moving on.
Yep. So I just wanted to point out some of the things that I think that Gabe kind of touched me for. Flow is not going away. More and more people are using Flow with the new features of scheduling flows, before flow, screen flows. These are all just things that are going to increase people utilizing Flow, and we just have to kind of, I don't want to say adopt to it, but we do need to be very aware and present-minded when it comes to using flows. Templated flows are another big thing that are coming out. A lot of different products and App Exchange products are going to have templated flows that you can actually build your own templated flows. But a lot of those App Exchange products, they actually have code built into some of those too as well. Other applications like Health and Financial Cloud, I don't think it's spelled financial correct, are also using flows. One of the biggest ones there is your Lightning scheduler that utilizes code as well. So there is actually pre-built applications that are using Flow that incorporate code in there already. So this isn't something that's going away. It's going to be something I think is going to become very prevalent within the Salesforce ecosystem.
Nice. All right, so with that, let's do a demo.
I'm excited.
We can't hear you cheering, which is so sad.
I think I can hear.
I'm going to assume that there is just rampant enthusiasm and good tidings from everyone about this demo. All right, so we're going to do a little bit of flowception here. If you've ever seen the movie Inception, we're going to do flows within code, within flows, within. This is going to get all confusing. So if you ever get overwhelmed, just tell me to slow down. The first thing is going to be flows within Lightning components. So you have the ability to embed flows within Lightning components. Unfortunately, as far as I know, it only works with Aura, which is not ideal because you're using components. But Aura components and Lightning Web Components interface together well enough, especially when you toss the new Lightning message service into the table, which I haven't played around with a ton. It was in the Lightning Web Components super badge, but in theory, as far as I understand it from the documentation, you have the ability to interface, send messages between an Aura component to a Lightning Web component to a Visual Force page if you want. So it's sort of this grand type trifecta of messaging. And so as far as the ability to send messages out from an LWC over to an Aura component, my understanding is that you can do that. So as long as you're willing to work around the edges of some of the difficulties of the fact that you do have to do an Aura component, and I'll show you some of the ways that I've gotten around it here with this demo, you really can embed a flow anywhere you want within a custom component. And you can even get your component to react when changes are made in the flow. You can set a callback function to receive messages from the flow and change things about your component based on what the flow is saying. So what I've done is I've copied some things over from the documentation. And the one that I'm going to be demonstrating is current stage. But you've got a bunch of other ones here. You can say, what are all the active stages? What's the title of the flow? Probably not much use in the GUID, GUID. The output variable is definitely very valuable there. So you can send out any messages you really want through variables marked for output. And then the status as well. So you can get a feel for, has it started? Is it paused? Are you on the finished screen? Did something go wrong? All of those things. So you can do something like if you error out your flow, instead of showing the scary flow, you know, there's an error in this flow message, you can just shut the flow down and display your own custom error message, which is really great. So let's close this down temporarily, and I'll hop over here. And I want to show you what I have made in this scratch org. I'm going to refresh, because right now you can see that I've just gone all the way through it. Wow. Maybe it's my... Can you guys still hear me? Maybe my internet's dying.
I hear Gabe.
Maybe Bevy's killing my browser.
Yeah, you may need to turn your camera off or something.
Let's try that.
Not that we all don't love.
Yeah, I've got a ponytail now.
Yeah, I was like,
it's brand new. My hair finally grew out long enough to tie it back. Okay, so my understanding is that you can do some of these things with flows, as I've learned. So I was sort of like trying to come up with something where you would want to embed a flow within a Lightning component. Maybe this is a bad example because you can put actually a flow on your record detail layout. But this is what sort of the first, this is an Aura component here that has a Lightning Web component embedded here at the top. And here's where the flow starts down here. So there's kind of three different pieces interfacing here. There's an Aura wrapper around all of this that I have enabled for being able to place within the record detail layout. So I used the Lightning App Builder to put it in this Opportunity Builder tab. And then within that Aura component, I started building out my subcomponents. So let's take a look at the code and see what we've got here. So my wrapper component is here. So this is my Aura wrapper component, and I have it FlexiPage available for all page types, and then I do the has record ID, so I can go and get the record ID from the current account. And I have the Aura attribute here for the step that I'm on within the flow, that you'll see that in a little bit. I've got Aura, obviously the initiation handler here. And here you see where I've got my Lightning Web component, where I've got my path component, and I'm passing in the step parameter. And then you see that the flow is at the bottom, where I've given it an ID. And then here's that piece about the on status change. So when you go in here and look at the controller, I try to keep my Aura components as light as possible for obvious reasons, because they're kind of old and you don't really want to use them if you can help it. So that's why I've got the, kind of my Lightning Web component there for the path, that piece. But what this does is on initiation, it's finding the flow component. It's submitting variables to it. So here's how you set your input variables. And I'm retrieving my record ID that came out of the Force has record ID, and then you just start the flow. And here's where you set the flow name. So let me show you what my flow looks like. See, this is where it gets so complex, because I'm like bouncing around. Here I'm at the code, and now I'm at the flow over here. I've had a lot of fun putting this together here. So let me show you my flow that I start up here. My opportunity builder flow, which is a screen flow. Now, Jake, you can correct me if I did this wrong. I've never used stages before. All I wanted to do was reflect what stage I was on with this progress bar component. So I kind of made it up how it works. I don't really know if you need to do these assignments. Maybe it knows how to do it automatically. Can you answer that question for me?
Depending on how you built it, I think you have to do the assignment in order to recognize, for it to recognize each of your screens. And a completely side note, this is actually ApexJan product.
What do you mean?
Your stage value there, that's actually a Salesforce Labs.
Oh, I had no idea. Whoops.
But no, no, it's a good example. I was just throwing that out there. If this is something that somebody really wants, they can go to the ApexJan, go to the Salesforce Labs, and find this.
Got it. Cool. So I'm setting the current stage to this X1 stage, and so you see here I've got my stages, and it's got a label to it somewhere. There it is. That's the label. And so I needed that because it does this goofy, I suppose if I'd done something other than a 1, I could have gotten it. But the way I wanted to make it work with my progress bar, I'm actually pulling the label in my JavaScript. So I'm setting that, and then the screen create opportunity is the next screen that comes up. So you see here, I'm not really setting any variables other than whatever gets put into the opportunity name here. But I am setting this variable. So when this variable assignment happens, the JavaScript reacts to it. So over in my controller, this handle status change method does get invoked. You can see I was playing around with some stuff. This is how I would be able to pull out some output variables, but I'm not actually using those. I'm just doing the current stage parameter. So don't forget, if I hop back over here, let's see. This is the current stage parameter that I can get out of this. And so I'm retrieving the current stage, and then you see that I'm pulling the label. So I can pull the label or the name of it, and then I'm just assigning that over to my step. And when I assign it over to my step, it goes and injects it into my Lightning Web component. And when I go to my Lightning Web component, I'll show you that. I've got 2 pieces to it. This was me playing around and not understanding what was going on. I don't think I actually needed to do a get set methodology here. I think I could have just done add API step equals 1, but whatever. This is another way that you can basically do the same concept of an API enabled variable here. And so I got the step, the opportunity builder path takes that and figures out which step I should display in the progress step component, because these values correspond to the labels of my stages in my flow. And I'm putting the current step right in there. So as I navigate through the flow, this component is actually responding and saying, oh, now you're on this step, now you're on this step. And it's cool because you can see that I can do a lot of interesting things with this. There's a lot of opportunities here. This looks like a pretty, there's little, sometimes you have issues with clients or other customers where they maybe don't like the way the flow works or looks. Well, you kind of have a way around it with things like this, because you can really kind of enhance and build and wrap around the flow, and kind of create a lot of opportunity around that flow to be able to surface information coming out of the flow. So you saw that I could do those output variables. Those are in there as well as an opportunity to pull those values out. So I could do something like a sidebar component here, where I'm like giving suggestions and steps, or if there were values that came previously out of the flow that I wanted to kind of save and track as I went along in the flow, like say like, oh, you entered this previously, here's the value. I could definitely do that as well. I was kind of thinking about doing sort of a sidebar component for this demo as well. Just never got around to it. So the first step is just a simple screen component here, enter the opportunity name. The idea being here that this is like an easy way to create opportunities for this account. So I'll just call it GenWatt sales opportunity. And then I'll go next. And so you see that was the next button of the flow. And what it did was it called my JavaScript, gave it the stage name, and I was able to then pass that down into my Lightning Web component to tell it to move the stage along of the step along of the progress indicator, which is really cool. So I've got a little, I think flows can do this too with the progress bar, but you can kind of get the feel for all of the things you can do with these callbacks, getting responses from your flow. It's very powerful. Okay, so this is step 2 of the screen flow. And this is where the inception really starts. So I've created a Lightning Web component and added it to my flow here on a flow screen. And I can, I guess I didn't make it, so I was submitting the record ID down in. So little few changes on the fly here. I don't think I'm even using the record ID, honestly, so I'll just save it. But anyways, so this is where you can actually set parameters to pass down into your Lightning component. So I had this parameter that I passed in from the Aura component, what's the record ID, and I can then pass that down into a Lightning Web component. So I can pass the record ID in like this. And let's take a look at the code for the opportunity product adder. So where's the good stuff here? So, and actually I'm now on the next slide here. So I'll back up and I'll show you the rest of this piece. So you can get it to react to changes. Cool. So now we're on the next one, Lightning components in flows. So you can integrate a Lightning Web component in a flow. You can do that by modifying your XML meta file like so. This is very Googleable if you want to pull up this code sample, but the basis of it is you're doing this target config targets Lightning flow screen piece. And what you can do is you can set those API decorated variables in your LWC, and you do it with these target configs. So you say it's for the Lightning flow screen, and this is what I want my property to be called. You have to name this the same way as your API decorated variable. But when you do that, you can pass values down into your Lightning Web component. So I've got an example of that. So I've got this here, and my API variables here, record ID. I've got a data table in this component. So you see the data table here, and I've got like a little mini product lookup search that I've got going on here. So there's a few things going on in this Lightning Web component. I've got the data table columns. I've got my search method. I've got a selection method for when I click the response from the search. And then we'll get to this one later, because this is where we go into inception level 3. The example of getting a price from an API kind of combined with allowing an admin to maybe do something like apply a tax on top of it within a flow. So we'll get to that one. Let me show you the markup here for this. A little bit combobulated around the search here. I'm using raw SLDS here, and then I got my data table. So when I do this, you can see I got my product lookup here. I can search, let's say I want to search for GenWatt, and I can select one of these. So you already can see that I can do some pretty cool things here. And this is still within a flow. I'm still within the flow, but you would never really know that because this is highly customized. This is custom here. This is custom. So I can put it in my data table. Can you do that in a flow? Not really. You can do some similar things, but it's not going to look this good. And I can integrate this in my previous page. You know, this was just a regular flow screen, but now all of a sudden my next step, I'm doing this complex product search here where I can add products to this opportunity that I'm creating. Let's add another product, GenWatt Diesel, yeah. So you can see that I can kind of do a little opportunity building process here where I'm doing a lot of complex logic. I'm working with related products. I've got, probably most importantly, an Apex controller for this, so I can interface with my Lightning Web Component to that Apex and do whatever I want there, which comes in for this price retrieval mechanism. If you see here at my opportunity product adder JavaScript, I've got this handle select method. So when I was clicking on the responses from my search, I go and retrieve the ID of the selected product, and I'm figuring out which product of my grand products list that I saved earlier when I did my search, figuring out which one's the product I want, and then I go and send it over to get price from API. And what's get price from API? It's where I start calling my get price method in my Apex. So I'm going to keep going on along this trail, but soon I'm going to have to show you my next slide, because what I'm doing is I'm submitting over my product ID. So here's my method in my Apex controller. So I'm receiving the product ID, and this is where we get to the next slide. Did anybody, oh, I wish I could ask, I'm like, does anybody have any questions? Maybe you could drop your questions in the chat if anyone's curious or wants me to slow down or anything.
Yeah, Gabe, your last, I haven't seen any questions, but when your last demo there, I was going to do the slow clap because I'm really excited about that type of functionality, because that is something that's not currently available in flows. And it's always nice to see that type of functionality where you can have some more complex types of stuff in a flow. And what you just showed there is something that actually comes up very often, not just with customers, but also I've seen that type of request within the community as well. So.
Yeah, nice. Very cool. Okay, so let's go on to my next slide here. I'll pop this open so you can see it. Apex calling a flow. So you can have Apex call out to auto-launched flows. You can submit parameters to them and get get values back. When I discovered that I could do this, my mind was blown. All of a sudden, I was like, oh, wow. Flows just became so much more interesting to me, because rather than, you know, kind of the paradigm that I had been thinking in, that the only ways that you could interface between code and flow is to kind of go from flows to code, when I realized that I could flip that on its head and outsource logic that I would have written in my Apex over to an admin to have them decide what everything should be, and then they can give me a response back, it blew my mind. I was like, holy cow, I had no idea you could even do that. So it totally works. You set your parameters. It's just a map here of a string to an object, and so I'm putting my product ID into those parameters, passing them into the flow. It's called get price. And then I start the flow, and then I can go and get the response back. So I send that in, and then I get my response back within the price variable. This is a super great way to wrap admins and Flownatics into helping build your LWC logic. As you can see, or maybe I need to show you. As you can see, since I'm calling this flow from an Aura-enabled method, that means that I can call flow logic from a Lightning component. And I don't want to understate how freaking cool that is. You can actually have flows be deciding what should display within your Lightning component. So this is where the inception starts blowing my mind, anyways, because that's so valuable. You're really interfacing in a way that you haven't really, I've never really done it too much before. And like the opportunities to me are kind of boundless. You literally can write an Apex controller method that is entirely a flow for a Lightning component. Jake, what do you think about that?
Memorized and fascinated by this because I can see so much potential where, as an admin, there may be certain parts that maybe we just need to have a little more control over, or we really built this logic and we may have to customize the logic here and there, but it's something that's manageable that we can just feed back in. It's kind of cool.
Yeah. This one I kind of copped out on. You could see that my flow doesn't really do that much. I could play around with it here with you guys and do something like do the tax example that I was talking about here. But right now my flow is giving up as a flow, and it's calling back to Apex because I wanted to show you the fourth scenario. So unfortunately, this flow is not a very great flow from the perspective of I kind of didn't need it. But it goes to show for this example, for this fourth interaction point between code and flows calling Apex. Now this one people are a little bit more familiar with, and Salesforce calls this one out a lot. I think we've done a presentation in the past, Jake, because I think Salesforce had like some pre-made slides for it. But it's using these Apex decorators invocable method. You can do like a label for it. So it's easy to figure out in the flow which one it is, and you can kind of give it a description. And then what I want to point out is how valuable it is to use these invocable variable wrapper classes. And this is like the only way I use this now. Excuse me, just because it's kind of hard to use the method of doing this without these. So if you're writing invocable methods, I would highly recommend following this path where you're using the invocable variable wrapper classes here, where you have a request and then a response to it, because you can set it up so that these are what show up in your flow to be able to set your input parameters, and then you can go get those values back out when you're done with it. So what I'm doing here is very simple cop out, and I called it call pricing API because this is an example of something you might want a flow to outsource to Apex. If you have an example where you need to make a call out right now, although they'll probably add it soon, right now you can't make a call out. Jake, please correct me if I'm wrong. You can't make a call out from a flow, right?
You talking about like to an external? No,
like an HTTP server call out. Yeah, but you can do something like this. So you can set it up as an invocable method. You can call your API, wait for the response, and then send that response back to your flow. So all you have to do is really just do your HTTP call out within your Apex here, give it back to the flow, and now the flow can do all sorts of fancy things with it. So right now I'm copping out. You can see my price is always set to 10. But if this were a real API, I could send it over the product ID and say, give me the price for this product ID if I'm using some sort of external pricing service. And so then I can use the call pricing API result I add that to the result, and then I return those results back over to the flow. So flows calling Apex is also super valuable. This one's a little bit more trodden, and I think folks are maybe a little bit more familiar with this one, but also very powerful. And so since you have all of these 4 interaction points, the front end going both ways, flow and a lightning component and a flow, and then you've also got it on the back end Apex side, Apex calling Flow, Flow calling Apex. You've got all the interaction points you really need to build out this collaboration between admin and developers. You really can do so much with all of these different points here. So again, parameters for input and output. So everything you would need is all there. And so this is a great way to enhance flows and make them more powerful. You don't have to assume, well, I can't do that with a flow, because you can always just have a developer join the flow team and help them build out the flow. Oh, my dog's getting mad. Sorry if she starts barking. Okay, so that's where the price came from. It was, just to recap, my JavaScript handler for selecting a product called out to my Apex. My Apex then called to a flow. The flow then called back to the Apex. Apex said, price is 10, gave it back to the flow. Flow gave it back to the Apex. Apex gave it back to the Lightning component. And all the while, all of this is embedded within a Lightning component already. So super cool stuff. And then now I'm back to the flow. So next step, I made a flow screen that's just a upload supporting documents, basic file upload component. I did hide the header because the header made it look kind of weird with the Lightning component. So I definitely recommend kind of sticking to that, because you can see how nice it is that I was kind of just able to make my own header. And I could style this however I wanted. So very cool that I could just can that and basically build my own header. I could upload a file here for my opportunity that I'm building and then finish. And since you can do actions on finish, you see that it kind of restarted the flow. Well, I don't have to do it that way, since way back on the wrapper component, I had the ability to respond based off of whether or not it's finished. You see I can do this event get param status finished. What I could do is just do like a Aura if hide around my Lightning flow and just hide the flow off the screen. I don't need it anymore. I'm finished with it. So that's kind of the whole enchilada of all the different ways that you can interface with these. I've got kind of a discussion slide, but I don't know how great of a discussion we can have here with no sound. But so challenges and opportunities, just kind of want to have a discussion around that. But it's hard to speak the same vocabulary. The ways that I've struggled with this on projects, because we have started trying to use concepts like this with the flow code interactions, is that you really need to learn just basic interfacing, which, it's a problem between devs too. You need to be able to understand, what, if you're writing an API, right, you write a spec for it, because you need to understand what's the payload I need to give, and then how do I read the response from it. It's the same problem. It's an interfacing problem. So the challenge here and the opportunity is, well, what are the next steps? How do you build a framework of interaction so that developers and admins can learn how to work hand in hand? And so I've wondered about, would the next steps be things like, the kind of things we do as developers, where you might write like a Java doc and try to say like, well, these are my parameters, here's my variable names, and here's how you can go pull these values out, from the flow in your code, or the same vice versa. Well, I'm setting these parameters, and here's what I want to pass into the flow. Or the Apex, you're writing an invocable Apex. Oh, what's the name of the variable I need to set there? So it becomes an interfacing problem in a lot of ways. But we have to deal with interfacing problems all the time. So it's kind of an opportunity there for next steps. So open to a conversation if anybody has any questions about this, or comments, ways that you think this could be improved. This is kind of a think piece that I've had in my head for a while, and I kind of want to keep evolving this conversation around flow code interactions because I think it's a really interesting topic, and I don't really know how many people are kind of
Gabe, I actually think
talking
you hit
about
on a good point there. Documentation of your flow is kind of what you're getting to, right? And I'm just putting that in more of a layman's term for myself and other people that. Yeah, I think it would be great if you wrote out a flow and handed it off to developers and said, here are the variables and this is what it does. And they think, oh, cool, I can write such a this, call this flow, and then it spits out this and I can use that. I think that would be a really good tool for admins to have for themselves, because that now they know how their tool works, but they also can hand it off to someone and somebody else can reuse those parts. So it's all about that reusability. So I actually think that could also be a good session for us to just like how to document your flow properly, especially if it's going to be something that gets used in conjunction with code.
Yeah. I mean, like the problems come up that developers face all the time. If I don't know if we have any developers on the call here that have tried to put up a pull request and had it rejected because someone doesn't like the way you named your classes or methods or variables, right? There's lots of different ways you can do it. You can do snake case, you can do camel case, lots of different ways that you can kind of name your variables or methods. And so there's sort of patterns around it there. But the thing I end up kind of dealing with on the flow side is that you don't always have that level of experience with that problem. And so flows are kind of new to the problem of variable naming, and especially because Salesforce will do things like automatically populate a name that is automatically snake case. You end up with what I consider kind of a poor practice, especially for like naming variables. So it's a challenge to kind of think through how do you build up that communication. And developers aren't always the best at communicating, right? But I think the answers are there, especially in the traditions of coding and developers, how these patterns have all kind of like evolved over time. And so it's a problem that developers can be quite familiar with, but maybe admins maybe not so much.
To be completely honest, if you were to ask me, like I know what it means, but I'm going to do whatever Salesforce is doing because that's what's most convenient at the point. So, but
Right.
I've also seen people where they build a flow out and they call a variable something, and then they've changed kind of what the original whole entire flow was supposed to be like, and that variable no longer makes sense because it's utilized throughout the whole entire flow. Like the naming convention doesn't make sense anymore.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that, where you're just kind of finding weird variable names that don't really make sense.
Salesforce is new.
You see that in code too. Like, well, what the heck does this variable mean?
When we declare variables, we have a little bit more control. But like I said, a lot of the stuff Salesforce is just setting for you, and sometimes it makes perfect sense, and sometimes like you're creating the label, but the API is being auto generated for you sometimes, and you can go back and modify it. But if it works, you're most likely just moving on, and it may work. It may be fine.
The same problem if you rename it, it's like renaming a field on an object, right? And so all of a sudden your code, I don't even think it lets you rename it if you have dependencies on it. So you're kind of like, it's the same problem with naming fields too, right? Like sometimes you'll name a field something and all of a sudden it doesn't really make sense anymore, but you kind of got stuck to it. So it becomes the exact same kind of problem, right? How do you set up those methods of interfacing? How do you kind of plan ahead of the game so that your naming structure always makes sense all throughout the life of the application?
Documentation / planning ahead is the key to a lot of this. So there's the aftermath, but if you actually kind of do your pre-documentation, you can kind of figure out a lot of those things beforehand. So if you write out what you want to happen, you can get some of those naming conventions. You're like, okay, I'm gonna have 3 variables that I'm gonna have to pass values into from outside of the flow, and then on the outside of it, I'm gonna have to pass these variables out. So you know that, okay, I'm gonna have maybe 3 to 6 variables that I'm gonna have to call out, and just make sure they have a good naming convention wrapped around at least of those. Within the flow, I think there's a little bit more flexibility, and you can become a little more relaxed, especially with those external variables that are being passed back and forth. We definitely need good naming conventions around those.
What other questions do folks have?
Haven't seen you pop in there. If you have no questions, you can also just write no questions. That way we know that we're not just talking to ourselves. Thanks. Yeah, I think Gabe. I think Gabe and I are going to sit down. I think that's a good topic for us. Of kind of like how do you go about building a flow beforehand and the aftermath of like kind of documented that out. It probably won't be next month's session. Next month's session we have planned as the spring 21 release. So we're going to talk about that from the dev side. Like, what are the things that we see? What are the cool functions? We'll probably talk about some of the flow functions that are going to come out on that. Gabe, do you have anything else?
No, that's
All right, cool.
that's all I've got for today.
So yeah, look forward to another invite for February for us to talk about spring 21, and then hopefully we'll have some other topics out there. I think those two topics would probably be a joint session, and I think it'll be a great one for us to present because I think it'd be great.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you.
Let's succeed together. Hey, that's perfect for the topic of this session. Very fitting.
All right. Thank you for coming.
Cool.
And
thank you, everybody. It's been great to have you.
We'll probably go.
Yeah. Next time you'll be able to talk to you and see you in your face.
We'll use Google Meets. That seems to be a better approach for at least Gabe and I.
Yeah, I definitely like that a lot more. It's nice to be able to talk to people.
100% agree.
So
I thought I'd give it a try, and try has been given and has not been approved by me or Gabe. So.
Rejected.
So, all right, thank you.
Well, we're going to record this as well, right?
So
we
recorded
it
up there, so pay attention
Sweet.
to my Twitter handle for the video link for YouTube.
Wonderful. Yeah, it'll be a nice video where we just complain about.
Luckily, we started it after my internet issues and all that stuff. So luckily, it's the aftermath that we see. So we just hear a little bit complaint. Yeah.
Maybe we can edit it.
I think it actually starts with just your presentation, so we should be good. Yep. And
oh, great. Perfect.
I'm going to go ahead and stop recording now because we don't need to record any more of this.
Nice.